A state officer vanished in a Montana blizzard after a gunfight with arms smugglers. His radio went silent. His car, lost beneath the snow. Everyone thought he was gone. But miles away, a widowed father and his little girl heard a dog crying outside their cabin. When the man looked through the frost-covered window, he didn't just see a stranger fighting for his life. He felt it. That something was coming. Something that would test everything he believed about fear, faith, and the miracles that find us when we least expect them. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of courage, redemption, and the quiet miracles that walk beside us through every storm. The blizzard came down over the Montana mountains like a living thing, swallowing the moon and howling through the pines. Inside the patrol SUV, Officer Ryan Cooper gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. The radio hissed with static, the last words from dispatch long gone. Ryan was 35, tall, lean but strong, the kind of man whose presence carried quiet command. A thin scar cut through his left eyebrow, a remnant from his first year on duty when a hostage situation went wrong. Since then, he'd been a man who trusted action more than words. His face, angular and roughened by years of winter patrols, was set with determination as he peered through the snow-covered windshield. Beside him sat Bella, a 4-year-old German shepherd with sharp amber eyes and a coat dark as burnt cedar. She was trained to track, to bite, to obey. But Ryan always said she had something more than training. Instinct. Her ears twitched at every sound, muscles coiled under her thick fur, ready to react. Tonight, they weren't chasing just anyone. Harris and Cole, 2 brothers turned arms smugglers, had ambushed a convoy last month, killing 3 officers and escaping into the northern wilderness. Ryan had spent weeks tracking their route across the frozen backroads, through abandoned logging towns, piecing together fragments of tire prints and radio chatter. This was personal now, not because of the headlines or the promotion waiting if he succeeded, but because he still remembered the look in his captain's eyes when the bodies were pulled from the snow. Men Ryan had trained with, men who had families. The wind roared against the car, drowning out the hum of the engine. Bella whined softly, sensing her handler's tension. "Easy, girl," Ryan murmured, his voice low and steady, though pain already burned in his shoulder from hours of gripping the steering wheel in the cold. The headlights sliced through the wall of white, catching the faint shimmer of taillights ahead. A black pickup weaving across the icy road. "There you are," he muttered. His heart quickened, the familiar surge of adrenaline chasing away the exhaustion. He pressed the gas. The truck ahead jerked suddenly. A flash burst from its rear window. Gunfire. The windshield shattered with a crack, glass scattering like icy stars. Ryan jerked the wheel, but the bullet had already found him. It tore into his left shoulder, spinning him sideways. Bella barked, fierce and panicked, as the SUV swerved. The tires lost grip, the vehicle careening toward the edge of the ridge. Ryan fought the wheel, gritting his teeth against the spreading heat of pain. "Hold on, Bella," he shouted. But the world lurched sideways. The crash came with a roar of twisting metal. The SUV plowed through a snowbank and rolled twice before landing nose down against a stand of pines. The world fell silent, except for the storm. Steam hissed from the crushed hood. Ryan dangled from the seatbelt, blood seeping through his winter jacket, his vision dimming. Somewhere in the haze he heard Bella's bark, hoarse, desperate. She shoved her head against his chest, whining, then bit the strap of his belt, pulling with all her strength. The belt tore. Ryan fell onto the seat, gasping as cold air flooded in through the shattered window. Bella pawed at the door latch, jumping, scratching, until it gave way. Snow burst inside, sharp as knives against Ryan's skin. She tugged at his sleeve, pulling him inch by inch through the snow and out into the storm. Her paws sank deep, leaving crimson prints behind. Ryan's breath came ragged and shallow. He could feel the numbness creeping into his limbs, the kind that whispered death if you listened too long. He pressed a trembling hand against Bella's neck. "Find help," he murmured. The dog turned toward the wind, ears flicking. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a faint light blinked through the white. Bella barked once, then began dragging Ryan toward it, her body straining against the drifts. The wind clawed at them, throwing up spirals of ice. Ryan's consciousness flickered, images flashing behind his eyes. His captain's voice, his partner's laughter. The day he first met Bella at the K9 unit. He had called her stubborn. The trainer had smiled and said, "She'll save your life one day." Now, that prophecy unfolded in silence. Every few steps, Bella stopped to look back, checking that his chest still rose with breath. The light grew larger, a flicker of gold against endless gray. A cabin, perhaps, half buried in snow, smoke barely curling from its chimney. Bella barked, hoarse and low, pulling harder. Ryan's hand fell limp at his side, blood now black in the dim light. His lips moved soundlessly, as if trying to call her name. At last, they reached the steps of the wooden porch. Bella clawed at the door, barking once, twice, then howling, the sound cutting through the storm like a prayer. Inside, footsteps stirred. A shadow moved behind frosted glass. The door creaked open, spilling a narrow line of warm light onto the snow. Standing in the doorway was Jake Turner, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s with a face carved by grief and solitude. His hair was dark and unkempt, streaked with early gray, his beard rough and uneven. The hollowness in his blue eyes told of a life fractured, the kind that stopped believing in miracles. He froze at the sight before him. A German shepherd panting, bleeding, and behind her, a man in uniform lying half-buried in the snow. For a moment, Jake couldn't move. He had seen enough death for a lifetime. The image of his wife's last breath still haunted him. But as Bella whimpered and pressed her head against Ryan's arm, something inside Jake stirred, a voice older than pain, older than anger. Slowly, he stepped forward into the snow, the lantern light trembling in his hand. Morning never truly came to Silver Creek that winter. The storm had swallowed the sun whole, leaving behind a dim grayness that clung to everything like dust on forgotten glass. Inside the small log cabin, the fire crackled weakly in the hearth, its light casting trembling shadows across wooden walls scarred by time and silence. Jake Turner knelt beside the unconscious officer, the weight of disbelief still pressing down his chest. He was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, built like a man who'd once worked with his hands, before grief hollowed him out. His hair was dark brown, streaked with gray near the temples, unkempt from days without sleep. The beard along his jaw was uneven, more habit than care, and his eyes, icy blue and sharp, had the kind of distance that comes only when a man has watched the world collapse and kept breathing anyway. Jake had been an engineer once, a builder of bridges and machines, the kind of man who measured everything in clean lines and sure foundations. But no amount of structure could fix the ruin left by that night a year ago, when two gunmen fired into a gas station during a smuggling dispute, and his wife, Mara, happened to be standing by the wrong car. Since then, he'd moved with a quiet stiffness, avoiding people, avoiding God. The only reason he still rose each morning was the small girl now hovering in the doorway. Lily Turner was 8 years old, slight and pale, with long honey-blonde hair that tangled around her shoulders. Her gray eyes, soft and too old for her age, watched her father with both fear and curiosity. She wore a faded red sweater, hand-stitched by Mara long ago, its sleeves now frayed. She clutched a wooden cross in her small hand, a keepsake she often whispered to before sleep. Lily was the kind of child who saw wonder even in silence, who still believed that her mother was just away with the angels for a while. And though Jake had long stopped speaking of heaven, he couldn't bring himself to take that hope from her. Now she stepped closer, her breath visible in the cold. "Daddy," she whispered, voice trembling. "Maybe God sent them to us, like Mom used to say." Jake turned toward her, the words cutting deeper than she could know. For a moment, he wanted to tell her no, that there was no plan, no mercy left in this frozen world. But then he saw her eyes, bright with something he hadn't felt in years. He sighed, the sound breaking softly through the hush. "Maybe," he said at last. "Maybe." Together they lifted Officer Ryan Cooper from the snow and carried him inside. His weight felt unnatural, limp, heavy with exhaustion. His uniform was torn, the badge barely hanging to his chest. Blood soaked through the fabric, staining the floorboards as Jake laid him on the worn couch near the fire. Bella followed close, pressing her nose against her master's hand, refusing to move. Jake noticed the dogs trembling, the small gash on her leg, and the chatansu, frost clinging to her fur. He fetched an old blanket, draping it over both man and dog. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moaning through the chimney and the faint wheeze of Ryan's breathing. Jake studied him, the sharpness of his jaw, the fine lines of strain around his mouth. There was discipline there, a soldier's kind of steadiness, but also something haunted. Lily knelt beside Bella, whispering, "You're safe now, girl." Bella's amber eyes softened, and she rested her head on Lily's lap as if she understood. Jake worked in silence, cleaning the wound on Ryan's shoulder with warm water and the small medical kit he kept for emergencies. The sight of blood didn't shake him anymore. He'd seen too much of it the night Mara died. But as his hands moved, he felt a strange tightening in his chest, a memory of kneeling in another pool of blood, hearing his wife's last breath, feeling utterly helpless. He shook the image away. "Don't you die on me too," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure who he was talking to, Ryan, himself, or God. Hours passed before Ryan stirred. His eyelids fluttered, his breathing quickened. Jake leaned in. Ryan's voice came rough, hoarse as gravel. Where am I?" Jake hesitated before answering. "My cabin, Silver Creek Ridge." Ryan tried to sit up, groaning as pain surged through him. "Easy," Jake said, pressing a hand against his chest. "You lost a lot of blood." The officer blinked, his gaze shifting, then landing on Jake. Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. "I know you," he whispered. "Turner. Jake Turner." Jake froze, hand tightening on the bandage. "You've read my file?" he asked quietly. Ryan nodded weakly. "I worked the Harris case, the smuggling ring near the border." I remember your wife's name. Mara Turner. Jake's throat constricted at the sound of it. The air in the room seemed to shrink. You're telling me, he said slowly, you were chasing those same bastards tonight? Ryan exhaled, his words coming in broken fragments. They're still out there. The men who killed your wife. For a moment, Jake couldn't breathe. The fire crackled louder, filling the silence. He felt his pulse thunder in his ears, the edges of his vision trembling with anger. A storm rose inside him, fury, grief, the ache of all the nights he'd stared at his ceiling wondering why God spared him instead. His hand curled into a fist, the knuckles whitening. You sure? He rasped. Ryan nodded faintly, his eyes dim but steady. Harris and Cole. Same men. They won't stop. Lily looked between them, not understanding the full weight of what had been said, but sensing its gravity. Bella lifted her head, her gaze moving from one man to the other, as though she, too, felt the shift in the air. Jake rose slowly to his feet. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls closing in with memory. He walked to the window and looked out into the endless white. The snow still falling, silent and merciless. For the first time in a year, he didn't feel numb. He felt alive, with rage, with purpose, with something dangerous and holy all at once. His reflection in the glass looked unfamiliar, harder, hungrier. The part of him that had buried hope along with Mara stirred again, whispering, "You can finish this." He turned back toward Ryan, whose eyes had already drifted shut, breath slowing into exhausted sleep. Jake whispered to no one. Then we finish it together. The night deepened over Silver Creek, the storm easing into a cruel stillness. The wind no longer howled. It whispered, carrying the cold scent of pine and smoke from the wreck below the ridge. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned low, its glow flickering across tired faces and restless shadows. Jake Turner sat at the table, his hands clasped tightly around a mug of untouched coffee. The warmth barely reached him. He looked across the room at Officer Ryan Cooper, now awake but pale, his arm bound in thick bandages that Jake had wrapped himself. The officer's breathing was shallow, his uniform replaced with one of Jake's old flannel shirts. Beside the couch, Bella lay curled near the fire, her fur glistening with melted frost, one paw still trembling from strain. Ryan stared into the flames, eyes clouded with exhaustion and memory. It wasn't supposed to go like this, he murmured. His voice was low, edged with guilt. Jake studied him in silence, the lines on his forehead deepening. What happened? He asked, though part of him feared the answer. Ryan hesitated. He had the look of a man replaying every decision in his head, each one heavier than the last. We'd been tracking Harris for weeks, he began. Cross-state smuggling, weapons headed north. My unit caught up near the pass. 2 trucks, no backup, no radio signal. I thought we had them cornered. He swallowed hard. I was wrong. They knew we were coming. Harris was waiting. He's the one who shot me. At that name, Jake's jaw clenched. The mug in his hand creaked faintly under his grip. Ryan noticed but kept speaking. I saw his face this time. He's older, meaner. The kind of man who enjoys the hunt. When I went down, I saw him laugh. Ryan's gaze darkened. He didn't just want to escape. He wanted to finish what he started. Jake's voice came rough. And what exactly did he start? Ryan turned his head, meeting Jake's eyes. You know already." The words landed like a blow. Jake rose, pacing toward the window. Beyond the frost-blurred glass, the snow shimmered faintly in the moonlight, endless and silent. His reflection stared back at him. Hard eyes, a clenched jaw, the ghost of the man he used to be. When Mara died, people said time would dull the pain. But time hadn't dulled anything. It had only sharpened the edges of the wound, carving guilt into his bones. He had been at work that night, fixing an engine miles away. He hadn't answered her last call, and when the sirens came, it was too late. Now, hearing that the men responsible still breathed, the ache in his chest turned into something else, something sharper, colder. "Maybe this is it," Jake muttered. "Maybe God's given me a chance to settle the score." Ryan shifted, pain flickering across his face. "Or maybe he's giving you a chance to do what's right." Jake turned sharply. "What's right? You think I don't know the difference?" The air grew, tense, the silence between them heavy as the snow outside. From the corner, Lily's small voice cut through it. "Daddy?" She stood in the hallway, barefoot, wrapped in a wool blanket that dragged on the floor. Her hair was tousled, her eyes wide and frightened. "Are you mad?" Jake's anger dissolved instantly. He knelt, pulling her close. "No, baby. Just thinking." She glanced at Ryan and Bella. "Is the bad man coming back?" Jake swallowed hard. "Not tonight," he said, though the words tasted like a lie. A faint sound interrupted them, the crunch of snow outside. It came from far down the slope, almost lost beneath the whisper of wind. Ryan's head lifted, every nerve alert. Bella's ears twitched, a low growl rumbling in her throat. Jake froze. "You hear that?" he whispered. Before they could move, the door creaked open slightly. A gust of icy air rushed in, along with the faint glow of a lantern. A man stepped through, Frank Dugan, the neighbor from half a mile down the ridge. He was 60, tall but stooped, wrapped in an old military coat faded from olive to gray. His face was deeply lined, a map of hardship and age, his beard silver with streaks of white. In his youth, Frank had been a Navy corpsman, patching men together on battlefields far from home. But after losing his son in Afghanistan, he'd withdrawn to these mountains, finding in the quiet what the world had stolen from him. "Evening," Frank said, voice gravelly but kind. "Saw smoke and a busted trail by the river. Figured someone got in trouble." His eyes landed on the broken uniform patch on the table, then on Ryan's blood-stained bandage. "Guess I was right." Jake exhaled, tension easing just slightly. "Car went off the ridge," he said. "Officer made it out alive." Frank nodded slowly, his gaze flicking toward Bella. "And the dog, too, looks like. Good girl." Bella gave a faint wag of her tail, but didn't relax. She kept her head up, eyes locked on the window. Frank set his lantern down, then straightened. "You boys need help or a ride to town?" "Road's blocked," Jake said. "Lines are down." Frank grunted. "Figured as much. Storm's meaner than it looks." He rubbed his chin, eyes narrowing. "Found some casing shells near the crash. Not from any hunting rifle I know. Looks military grade." Ryan's gaze sharpened. "Then they're close." The older man studied him a moment. "You expecting company?" Jake's expression hardened. "More like finishing a job." Frank let out a quiet sigh, reading the room in an instant. "Then I'd best stick around." They spent the next hour boarding windows and checking the rifles Jake had kept locked away since his wife's death. Lily watched silently from the couch, clutching Bella's collar. Ryan sat near the fire, reloading his sidearm with shaking hands. Every time he winced, Jake saw the flicker of guilt behind his eyes. A soldier haunted not by what he'd done, but by what he couldn't undo. Outside, the snow had slowed, the night deceptively calm. Then, far in the distance, a faint beam of light swept across the ridge, headlights moving through the trees. Jake felt the hairs on his neck rise. Bella stiffened, her growl deepening into a snarl. Ryan rose slowly, every muscle taut, his hand closing around the pistol. Jake moved to the window, the orange glow of the fire painting his face in shades of fear and fury. "They found us," Ryan whispered. Jake didn't look away from the glass. "No," he said quietly, the words steady but cold. "They came to finish what they started." Snow fell again that night, soft at first, then heavier, thick white curtains swallowing the last light of the mountains. The world outside had become a blur of gray and silence. Inside the cabin, fear had a heartbeat. Jake Turner stood by the window, shotgun in hand, watching faint headlights crawl up the ridge through the pines. His breath fogged against the cold glass. Behind him, the air was thick with smoke and tension. The fire crackled low, throwing red veins of light across wooden walls lined with shadows. Frank Dugan moved with a soldier's precision, dragging a table against the window, hammering metal tools across the frame to brace it. The old Navy corpsman's face was half hidden beneath the shadow of his wool cap. His hands, broad, scarred, steady, moved without hesitation. He'd seen enough sieges in deserts and jungles to know that fear only wins when a man stands still. "They'll come from the north side first," he said quietly. His voice was rough, scraped by years of wind and war. Ryan Cooper leaned against the wall near the stove, his bandaged shoulder throbbing beneath the flannel. Sweat gleamed against his pale skin despite the cold. The young officer's face was drawn, his eyes half-lidded but burning with focus. "Harris doesn't bluff," he muttered. "He'll circle the tree line and hit hard. They won't want survivors." His words hung heavy. Across the room, Lily sat on the rug, clutching Bella's neck tightly. The dog was alert, her ears perked, muscles tense beneath her dark fur. Her wound had begun to clot, but her breath came fast and short. Jake knelt beside his daughter, brushing her hair from her face. "It's going to be all right," he whispered, though he wasn't sure he believed it. Her small hand tightened around his sleeve. "Promise?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "I promise." The words came out low, shaky, but full of the kind of love that doesn't back down. Frank's voice cut through the stillness. "When they get close, stay low, and don't shoot till you see them move through the snow. Wind will mess with your aim." He tossed Jake a box of shells. "You ever fire one of these since?" Jake loaded the gun, jaw tightening. "Not since the night she died." Frank gave a brief nod, the kind that said everything between men who understood loss. Outside, the snow swallowed sound. Then, faintly, the crunch of footsteps. Ryan raised his pistol, his knuckles pale. "They're here." A shot split the night. The front window exploded inward, glass scattering across the room like rain. Lily screamed, diving behind the couch. Jake yanked her into his arms, shielding her as Frank returned fire through the shattered frame. Muzzle flashes lit the snow, ghostly streaks of orange. The air filled with the sharp tang of gunpowder and the howl of wind. Harris shouted from outside, his voice thick with mockery. "Turner, you should have stayed out of this. You want Bong. Revenge? Come earn it." His tone was cruel, confident, the voice of a man who believed God had long stopped watching. Jake's pulse thundered. That voice dragged every buried memory back to life. The screams, the flashing lights, the smell of gasoline. Rage burned through his fear. Ryan gritted his teeth and crouched near the door. "Frank, flank left," he ordered, slipping into the rhythm of command despite the pain. The old man nodded once and moved like a shadow. Jake handed Lily to Bella. "Stay with her, girl. Don't move." Bella barked once, soft and sure. Gunfire erupted again, short bursts cracking through the night. Harris's men charged from behind the trees. Jake fired from the doorway, the shotgun bucking in his hands. A man went down in the snow. Frank picked off another near the fence line, moving with deadly calm. But for every one that fell, two more seemed to appear, shapes blending with the blizzard. Inside, Lily huddled under the table, trembling. She whispered prayers under her breath, the same ones her mother used to say. Bella stood beside her, growling low, her tail rigid. Another shot ripped through the cabin wall, splinters raining down. Jake flinched as a round grazed his arm, slicing through his jacket. Pain flared, but he kept firing, driven by something greater than survival. Cole, Harris's younger partner, burst through the back door, rifle raised. He was tall, gaunt, his face drawn tight with nerves, the kind of man who followed orders because fear was easier than thinking. Jake turned just as Cole aimed. The two locked eyes. Time slowed. Jake saw the hesitation there, the same flicker of conscience that weak men carry before the end. He pulled the trigger first. The blast threw Cole backward into the snow, his body collapsing against the doorframe. Jake stood frozen for a moment, breath shaking, staring at the man who had murdered his wife. The revenge he'd imagined for a year felt hollow. No triumph, just a tired ache where love used to be. "It's done," Frank shouted, reloading. "Focus!" Then a scream. Lily's. Harris had forced his way through the front, his massive frame silhouetted by the lightning outside. He was in his 40s, tall and broad, face weathered by violence. A jagged scar crossed his jawline, his eyes cold and colorless, like ice over steel. He moved with a predator's certainty, shotgun in hand. "Step away from the girl," he growled. Before Jake could react, Bella lunged. The German shepherd hit Harris full force, teeth sinking into his arm. The gun went off, the shot deafening. Bella yelped, twisting in pain, but refused to release her bite. Harris roared, swinging wildly, slamming her against the wall. Jake shouted, firing once, but missed as Harris ducked. The dog fell, limp, her body sliding across the floor. Lily screamed again, reaching toward her. "Bella!" Ryan, bleeding and half-conscious, forced himself upright. The room spun, but he steadied, his aim. Harris turned, raising his weapon toward Lily. Ryan fired. One shot. The bullet struck Harris square in the chest. He staggered backward, eyes wide in disbelief, then collapsed into the snowdrift spilling through the doorway. Silence followed. Heavy, suffocating, absolute. The storm outside began to howl again, as if reclaiming the world. Frank lowered his rifle. Jake dropped to his knees beside Bella, hands trembling as he pressed against the wound. The dog's breathing was faint, her eyes half closed. Lily crawled forward, clutching her fur. "Please don't go," she whispered. Ryan sank against the wall, the gun slipping from his fingers. The firelight flickered over his face. pale, calm, and strangely peaceful. Frank stood by the window, watching the snow swallow the dead outside. None of them spoke. Only the sound of their breathing and the storm remained. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving Silver Creek blanketed in a fragile white silence. The sky was pale gold, the kind of morning light that feels like forgiveness. The cabin was half collapsed, its roof sagging under the weight of snow and smoke. Inside, the air smelled of gunpowder, blood, and thawing pine. Jake Turner sat slumped against the wall, one arm wrapped around his sleeping daughter. His face was streaked with ash and exhaustion, but his eyes, red, raw, alive, stared toward the faint horizon through the shattered window. He could hear the faint wail of sirens cutting through the mountains, growing closer. It had been hours since the last gunshot. Harris lay dead in the snow, his body already half buried by the storm he thought he could control. Cole's rifle was frozen in his grasp, his final expression one of shock and regret. The dead were silent. The living clung to breath. Frank Dugan moved carefully through the ruins, his movements stiff but deliberate. The old soldier's coat was torn, his beard matted with frost. He had a deep cut on his temple that bled through the bandage, but he barely noticed. He checked Ryan's pulse. Weak. Steady. "He's alive," he said quietly. Jake nodded, though the words barely registered. His focus was on the figure lying near the hearth. Bella. Her fur was matted with blood, one paw twisted beneath her, breath shallow. Lily knelt beside her, whispering softly, her small hands pressed over the dog's wound. "Please don't leave," she murmured again and again, her voice breaking each time. Jake's chest ached at the sight. For the first time since Mara's death, he felt tears burn his eyes. He had promised Lily he'd protect her, and somehow, through the chaos and the fire, it wasn't him who had kept that promise. It was the dog. When the rescue teams finally arrived, 2 police trucks and an ambulance pushing through the snow, Jake barely heard their voices. The men moved with trained efficiency, checking for survivors, securing the scene. One of them, Deputy Claire Monroe, a woman in her early 30s with sharp features softened by compassion, knelt beside Lily. Her brown hair was tied back, her uniform speckled with snow. "Sweetheart," she said gently, "we're going to help your friend now, okay?" Lily just nodded, tears frozen on her cheeks. Ryan was lifted onto a stretcher, his face pale but peaceful. As they carried him out, he whispered something to Jake. "You kept your word. You protected her." Jake wanted to answer, but emotion caught in his throat. All he managed was a nod. Outside, the light cut through the gray sky like the first breath after drowning. Frank stood by the doorway, watching as the paramedics loaded Bella onto a blanket beside the others. "You think she'll make it?" he asked quietly. Jake looked down at the shepherd, her chest rising faintly with each breath. "If anyone deserves to," he said, "it's her." Weeks later, the snow had melted into soft mud, and Silver Creek no longer felt like a battlefield. The mountains were still white-capped, but the air carried the promise of spring. The old cabin had been rebuilt, expanded, reinforced, and renamed. A new wooden sign hung on the fence, carved by Jake himself, Haven Hollow. Beneath it, smaller letters read, "For the ones who served, and the ones who still wait." The land had changed, but so had the people. Ryan walked again, though his shoulders still ached in the cold. He moved slower, more deliberate now, his eyes softer when he looked at the world. The badge he once wore sat inside a small wooden box on the windowsill, retired, but not forgotten. Frank had moved into a smaller cabin beside Jake's, helping with the construction and the animals. "Can't sit still," he'd said with a wry smile, though everyone knew he stayed because he'd found something worth guarding again. Lily ran across the yard that morning, laughing, her red scarf fluttering behind her. The sound of her joy filled the valley like birdsong. Bella trotted beside her, bandaged but alive, a small limp in her step, but her tail wagging fiercely. The shepherd had defied every prognosis, her recovery nothing short of miraculous. Jake watched them from the porch, a mug of coffee steaming in his hand. His beard was trimmed now, his eyes calmer. The lines of grief were still there, but they had softened into something else. Acceptance. Maybe even peace. Ryan stepped up beside him, his breath visible in the crisp air. "She's stronger than all of us," he said, nodding toward Bella. Jake smiled faintly. "Yeah, she always was." They walked toward the new barn together, where a few rescued dogs rested in their kennels. The structure still smelled of fresh wood and sawdust. On the wall hung a framed photograph, Mara Turner, smiling beside a younger Jake, her arms wrapped around a puppy that looked a lot like Bella. Beneath it was a plaque Lily had made herself from an old piece of cedar. For Mom. And for the heroes who never gave up. Jake stared at it for a long time. "She would have liked this," he said softly. Ryan placed a hand on his shoulder. "She'd be proud. Of you, of Lily, of this." Lily ran over, breathless, cheeks pink from the cold. "Daddy, look!" She held out a daisy she'd found pushing through the thawing ground. "The first flower of spring." Jake knelt, taking it gently from her hand. "Guess even the snow can't stop everything from growing," he said. Bella barked once, a short, warm sound. Ryan knelt beside her, running a hand over her fur. "You didn't just save me," he whispered. "You saved them all." Bella leaned into his touch, her eyes half closed, as if she understood. The sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the valley. Snow glimmered on the peaks, melting into streams that would soon feed the rivers again. Jake lifted Lily into his arms, turning toward the cool mountains. For the first time he saw not a place of loss, but of life. "We made it, kid," he said quietly. "We're home." Behind him, the sign of Haven Hollow swayed gently in the wind, its letters catching the morning light. Beside it, Bella lay in the snow's reflection, her head resting near Lily's boots, eyes watching the horizon. The storm had come to Silver Creek, but it had not destroyed. It had cleansed. And as the first birds returned to the sky, the world finally felt still. They say miracles don't always arrive with thunder or angels. Sometimes they come quietly, through the hands of ordinary people who refuse to give up when the world turns cold. Jake, Lily, Ryan, Frank, and Mom and Bella didn't just survive the storm. They became proof that even in the darkest nights, God's light still finds a way to shine. It's not always in the grand moments or the miracles we pray for, but in the small acts of faith, the hand that reaches out, the heart that forgives, the courage to open your door to a stranger. In a world that often forgets kindness, this story reminds us that every soul can be a vessel for grace, that God still moves through the loyalty of a dog, the love of a child, the redemption of a broken man. and that no matter how fierce the storm, His warmth will always return with the dawn. So if this story touched your heart, share it. Let it be a small light in someone else's winter. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your own story of faith and courage. And don't forget to subscribe, so together we can keep spreading these reminders that hope, love, and miracles are still alive among us. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide you through every storm until the sun rises again in your own heart.